Carol C.
Chamlin.
With an E. You're the same name. Why are you?
I got the name wrong, right?
Get
How
your.
come Carol Chamlin? How come you cite Carol Van Dusen?
Like
because I'm Carol Van Dusen. I sent it to Carol Chamlin.
Well,
the link.
We've got two Carol Van Dusens.
Well, at least we have two Carols.
Oh, I know why you do, because I sent her the link.
Correct, correct. So the link is
So I'll change my name. I'll take care of this.
It's not a big deal. I don't think
I changed it to Carol E.
Okay.
That's you. Okay, so you're opposite people. Hi, Kathy Gray. Nice to see you. I'm going just to let you all know, we're going to leave a couple of more minutes for people to sign in, but we'll start very soon.
Yes, because it's David's birthday.
That's right. And his parents are over here. They can't talk because we have them muted, but
it's his birthday. Let him know that we're thinking.
Joanna.
Oh,
Joanna.
You can talk.
My friend Jean McGrain, I bought 3 tickets and she's using one of my tickets. So she's
okay. I see. She's connecting right now.
So she'll have your name
under my name.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Yes.
Happy birthday, son-in-law.
Great. So how many people do we have now?
We currently have 26, including the 3 of us, so 23 attendees.
Okay.
Joanna, do you have to let everyone in?
No,
I do.
I don't let anybody in. Leslie does. So
I take care of that.
But you do have to, it's manual.
It is. You can admit more than one person at a time if they're in the waiting room, but yes, it is manual. That's one of the security features that Zoom introduced a few weeks, actually in September.
Is that because people were crashing and getting in who didn't belong?
Yes, that is exactly what was happening. Yes.
Okay, we're going to wait 2 more minutes. At 5:35, we're going to start regardless of.
It's not disrupting for people to come in late.
No, it's not, but
I don't think it doesn't make any noise.
No, it's just a matter of we don't want them missing anything.
Yes, yes.
So just another minute.
Carol, the Augusts are here, Penny and Steve from The Observer.
Oh,
wonderful.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
We can see you. We'll get you soon.
There's some, right, from
Here
CUNY.
they come. Here they come. Here they come. Carol, you don't realize this. You're under my name, and I put myself under your name.
Oh, God.
Your friend,
Okay. Well, they'll figure it out, of course.
Because I sent you it, so it became your name, and I changed my name to your name.
Okay.
Okay.
So Joanna, we're at 31 people now. So
okay, would you mute everyone except me and whomever?
I will.
And I will
have to unmute you, Carol. Sorry, Joanna, but yes.
Okay.
I'll mute everybody.
Mute. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters November at Home with the League. I'm Joanna Leifer. I'm the Program Committee Chair for the New York City League. Every month, the Program Committee invites an expert speaker to discuss a political or social issue impacting the lives of New Yorkers. Tonight, we have a speaker who will discuss a topic that is currently impacting our lives right now, the Supreme Court, particularly the repercussions of the new conservative Supreme Court. With President Trump now having appointed 3 of the court's 9 justices, the Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority that could affect American law for decades to come. Our guest speaker, Professor David S. Cohen, teaches constitutional law at Drexel University. He will discuss how we got to this point and what it means for various parts of the law. I will introduce him in a few minutes. But before we go on, I have a few housekeeping tasks. The first one, just to let you all know, we are taping this program. So if you don't want to be caught on tape, please sign off now. Second, everyone but the speaker is being muted. This will cut down on any ambient noise and distractions. After Professor Cohen speaks, we will have a 15-minute Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat function below. David will be reading them off and he will answer these questions. Next, at the last month's meeting, we introduced a new segment to this program. We added an extra few minutes for people who want to stay on and discuss this topic in more depth. If you're interested, please stay on. Other people can sign off and we will talk just for a little bit more on this topic. And David has agreed to stay on for a few minutes to answer additional questions. Finally, I want to introduce the woman who's making this program possible, and that is Leslie Siegel. Leslie is an expert on coordinating Zoom programs. She knows all the technical stuff behind the screen, and she is a co-president of the League. Leslie will tell you a little bit more about what the League is doing and some of its upcoming programs. Take it away, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you all for being here this evening also. It's always great to see the turnout that we get for these at home with the leagues. It's very heartening that even in the midst of the difficult time we're in with the pandemic and even the upsurge of cases right now, we still are able to provide, informational and very interesting programs to our members and volunteers and the general public, and to see the kind of response that we get. The first thing I really do want to start with is I want to thank all of our members and all of our volunteers for all the work that you did in the lead up and during the general election period. As you can see, we had, higher than normal turnout in New York City. So that was great. We did a phenomenal job of convincing people to vote early, to the point where maybe they would have avoided the lines if they actually voted on election day. But I mean, it was great to see that people really got the message about early voting, because it's here to stay, and it was a huge success this year. So I want to thank you all for that. And I want to remind you, the work is not done. It's never done. But next year is a huge, huge election year for the city of New York. The mayor, the comptroller, the borough presidents, I could keep going, right? Public advocate, most of the city council up for election next year. So we can take a kind of like a little well-deserved break, but not for too long, because before you know it, it's going to be the primaries, and then it's going to be next year's general election. And as a reminder, it's the first year for the primaries that we're going to have ranked choice voting in New York City. So we have a lot of work to do to educate our constituents on what it means, ranked choice voting, why it's important, why they should vote in the primary, and how to actually use ranked choice voting to make more informed decisions about the candidates. So thank you for all you've done, and keep doing it, because we can't do it without you. And we also can't do it without our committees. So we do have some upcoming committee meetings. Tomorrow night is the monthly voter services meeting. And if you are super interested in helping educate voters about ranked choice and the importance of the primaries, that's the committee for you if you're not already on it. We also have our Committee for Criminal Justice Reform meeting on Thursday of this week. And then next week, we have our Census and Redistricting Committee. And now that, the state legislature elections are done, and not all the winners are finalized, but, in many cases they are, they're gonna start turning towards redistricting. So that's also, hugely important for the city. So if you're interested in redistricting and ensuring a fair and just redistricting for New York City, then next Wednesday is the committee for you, the Census and Redistricting Committee. It's Wednesday, the 25th at 6:30, right before Thanksgiving. So continue to do what you're doing. And if you're not yet a member of the League, I would like to encourage you to absolutely become a member of the League. You will get, not just of course supporting the League, you'll get better information and training and all that to understand voting in New York City, to understand all the different committees that we have and the different ways you can impact it. We've got Women's Rights Committee, Housing Justice, Committee for Criminal Justice Reform, Voter Services, everything you can imagine. We have lots and lots of committees, so I encourage you to get involved. You'll also get first access to our, great events. You'll learn about our events. We have some, interesting ideas coming up, and we do have our virtual gala coming up next year as well, probably in April. We're still nailing down a date and the keynote speakers and honorees, but you'll get all that information before anyone else. You'll also be able to talk to your family and friends and help them understand, with more information than you might otherwise have, the importance of voting and how to go about, why it's important to vote in the primaries, ranked choice voting, all that great stuff. So you can go to our website, lwvnyc.org, and you can join if you're not already a member. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Joanna.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, now that we have that, and we do hope you join, we do a lot of wonderful things. Now, to get on to our speaker, I want to introduce David S. Cohen. He is a professor of law at Drexel University, Thomas R. Klein School of Law, where he teaches constitutional law, reproductive rights, and gender and the law. A kind of interesting aside about Professor Cohen, he is an expert on feminist law issues. He is one of those good guys, and we would probably be interested in having him speak at future times, particularly now that the Supreme Court is not so in favor of we women. Prior to teaching, Professor Cohen was a staff attorney at the Women's Law Project. He is currently on the board of the Women's Law Project and the Abortion Care Network. He previously published a book called Living in the Crosshairs, The Untold Story of Anti-Abortion Terrorism, which sounds really intriguing and sounds like a really good read. David has appeared both on MSNBC and CNN. And with no further ado, I'd like to turn this meeting over to David Cohen.
Thank you so much, Joanna and Leslie and everyone else for being here this evening. I'm excited to talk to you about the Supreme Court, even if I'm not personally excited about the future of the Supreme Court. And I'm also excited about talking with the League of Women Voters. I'm a big fan of the work that you all do around the country. Here in Pennsylvania, where I am, the League of Women Voters brought a really important lawsuit a couple of years ago that resulted in redistricting in Pennsylvania that, everyone's paying attention to Pennsylvania these days. Everyone knows that we're a pretty evenly split state, but we had always had a very lopsided representation in Congress. I think before the redistricting, we had 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats because of gerrymandering. And as a result of the lawsuit from the League of Women Voters, we're now at 9-9, which is probably what it should be in Pennsylvania, because they won their case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court redrew the lines, and now we have fair districting in Pennsylvania. So I really appreciate the work that the League does around the country on these important issues. So let me share my screen with you because I've got some really basic PowerPoint slides I really just like to share pictures with PowerPoint, not wordy summaries of what I'm talking about. So you'll see a bunch of pictures here. So I'm talking today about the repercussions of a conservative Supreme Court. What I'll cover some basics about the Supreme Court for people who don't know much about the Supreme Court, the changes that happened during the Trump administration, what these changes are going to mean in the future for some key areas, and then what can be done about it. And then I look forward to hearing questions and thoughts afterwards. So let me start with some basic information about the Supreme Court. We've got a 9-justice court here. These are the current 9 justices on the Supreme Court. They are appointed by the president. They serve for life or until they step down. They are confirmed by the Senate. And in the Supreme Court, a majority wins. So there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. A 5-4 decision has just as much weight as a 9-0 decision. They both rule and they both are final decisions on the matter. As a general matter, the Supreme Court has the final say on what the Constitution means, the federal Constitution, and US federal law means. They have the final say about that. And so when it comes to the issues that I'm going to be talking about or what the Supreme Court deals with, oftentimes the Supreme Court will look at laws from states to determine if what states have done is constitutional. If the federal Constitution says a state can't do something, then the state law is unconstitutional. If the federal Constitution is silent about an issue, it just doesn't say anything about an issue, then states are allowed to do whatever they want. So a couple examples of this, not having anything to do with what I'm going to talk about for the future of the Supreme Court, but for instance, fireworks, right? If you have driven up and down the East Coast, you know some states you're allowed to buy fireworks. They have roadside stands. Other states, you can't buy fireworks for personal use. So in the Northeast, New Hampshire and Maine, you can buy fireworks for personal use. The other states you can't. Because the federal Constitution, the US Constitution, says absolutely nothing about fireworks, this is allowed. We can have state variation. State variation is one of the things that is unique about the United States. Different states have different policies, and on fireworks, they can have different policies. And the federal Constitution, the Supreme Court, it's totally fine to have those differences. But as another example, I'll show you a map of the state of the law in 1966 with respect to interracial marriage. In 1966, there were 17 states that prohibited interracial marriage, the states in red here. And then in 1967, the Supreme Court ruled in a case Loving versus Virginia that interracial marriage was protected under the Constitution, that the Equal Protection Clause, the clause of the Constitution that guarantees equality, requires states to allow interracial marriage. And because the Supreme Court found that right in the Constitution, all of a sudden, as soon as that case was decided, this entire map turns blue. So states are not allowed to have the variation that you're allowed to have with something like fireworks, because the Constitution says nothing about fireworks, but the Constitution has a clause about equality. So there has to be equality with respect to marriage around the country in every state. So that's just basically how the Supreme Court works and the basics for what we're talking about today. Okay, so let's turn to what happened during the Trump administration with the Supreme Court. This is a picture of the Supreme Court in 2016, early 2016. We'll say the first month and a half of 2016. We had a 5-4 conservative majority. Justice Kennedy, who here is pictured on the bottom right next to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who all I'm sure recognize. Justice Kennedy was considered the man in the middle. He's still alive. He's a conservative, he's a Republican, but he was less conservative than the other 4 conservatives on the court, which meant that everyone wanted to get Justice Kennedy on their side when they were arguing to the Supreme Court. because although he generally was conservative, he had more liberal leanings on topics like abortion, lesbian and gay rights, the death penalty, and a few other topics. And so even though he generally voted conservative, he would vote with the liberals on the court on those topics. And it kept the Supreme Court from being as conservative as some of the others on the court wanted. That's where we were in early 2016. But then we had a 4-year period in which we had rapid change on the Supreme Court. So starting in February 2016, Justice Scalia, pictured on the left here, died. He was the most outspoken, well-known conservative on the Supreme Court. Justice Thomas is probably more conservative than Justice Scalia was, but Justice Scalia was really outspoken about his conservatism. He was very pointed in his writing. He made a lot of enemies on the court because he accused people of not being smart, and really made fun of them if they didn't agree with him. He passed away in February 2016. This was seen as a moment in which the court could really change, because 2016, February 2016, we have one of the conservatives on the Supreme Court dying. President Obama is currently president. He gets to nominate a new Supreme Court justice. And so if you could replace a very conservative Justice Scalia with a more liberal justice from President Obama, that would change the court drastically. And so this was a moment of opportunity for the Democrats and for liberals. And so President Obama nominated Merrick Garland, who is a judge on the DC Circuit, which is the federal appeals court that covers the District of Columbia. Merrick Garland is a very well-respected federal judge, not that liberal, but he's definitely a liberal, but he's not anywhere near as liberal as, say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was or Sonia Sotomayor is. But he's well-respected, been on the bench a long time. And I think Obama nominated him thinking, well, I can get the Republican-controlled Senate to confirm Merrick Garland because he's not that controversial. But a Merrick Garland replacing Justice Scalia would flip the court to be 5 liberals and 4 Democrats. The Republicans understood this. They understood this very well. And so Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, the Senate Majority Leader, gets to control everything that happens in the Senate. So he determined that he was not going to bring Merrick Garland's nomination before the Senate because he didn't want President Obama to have the opportunity to replace Justice Scalia. And he used some theory that he frankly just made up, the Republicans made up in 2016. They said, we can't appoint a justice or we can't confirm a justice so close to an election. This was March of 2016 when President Obama nominated Merrick Garland. And so the Republicans said, the people are going to decide in November who the next president is. So we should let the people control who takes Justice Scalia's place. So if a Democrat wins the presidency, they get to replace Scalia. But if a Republican wins the presidency, they get to replace Scalia. Let the people decide. And everyone criticized McConnell and the Republicans, saying there is no such rule. There have been plenty of justices appointed in election years, but they held steady and they refused to bring the nomination of Merrick Garland before the Senate. And then we all know what happened in November 2016. President Trump wins. When he gets into office, January 20th of 2017, one of the first things he does is he nominates Neil Gorsuch, pictured here on the right, to take Antonin Scalia's place. Neil Gorsuch was at the time 50 years old. He's now 53. He is a conservative from the Mountain West. He is a textualist. He says, I'm only going to interpret statutes based on what's in the text. He says he's an originalist. I'm only going to interpret the Constitution based on what the people who wrote the Constitution meant. And so he was thought to be a reliable conservative. And he was confirmed by the Senate. Mitch McConnell needed to get rid of the filibuster in order to confirm him because the Democrats were furious about what happened to Merrick Garland. So none of the Democrats voted for Gorsuch. But because the Republicans had a majority, they were able to get rid of the filibuster and confirm Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Given his age, he's going to be on the Supreme Court for 30 or 40 years into the future. But his appointment to replace Scalia with Gorsuch didn't change that much, other than replacing an older justice with a younger justice, because you replace a conservative with a conservative. So that's a wash. Things got really interesting in 2018. In June 2018, Anthony Kennedy, who I previously told you was the middle justice on the court at the time, conservative, but the one in the middle, he retired. He announced he retired. He was, by all accounts, in good health, but he just decided he was going to retire. That meant President Trump got a legitimate appointment to the Supreme Court. And now the fight began, because this meant that the justice in the middle, who sometimes voted with the liberals, was going to be replaced with a justice that presumably would always vote with the conservatives. And so President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh, pictured here on the right, a 53-year-old judge on the same court as Merrick Garland, the DC Circuit Court. He was a conservative darling. He had been groomed since his youth to be a conservative judge, federal judge, possibly Supreme Court justice, thought to be a solid conservative vote on every issue there is. And his nomination, although opposed by liberals, was sailing through until the middle of his confirmation hearings, if you remember, 2018, when Christine Blasey Ford came forward and said that he had sexually assaulted her back when they were classmates or neighbors growing up in their teen years. And it threw the Senate hearing, his confirmation hearing, into craziness over this allegation. Ultimately, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard from Christine Blasey Ford. They heard from Brett Kavanaugh, where he very angrily denied the character assassination, so he said. And the Republicans passed his nomination through the Senate Judiciary Committee, where it went to the Senate floor, and he was confirmed with the barest majority possible, 50 to 49. He was confirmed in the Senate. This gave, because Justice Kennedy, the middle justice, is replaced by young Brett Kavanaugh, a reliable conservative, this gave the Supreme Court now a 5-4 reliable, or so we thought, conservative Republican majority. But things got a little strange over the past 2 years. What happened over the past 2 years is that Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, and even Justice Kavanaugh swung to the middle in some key cases, while the liberals stuck together. On abortion rights, gay rights, the president's tax returns, the justices had some liberal rulings that surprised everyone. So it wasn't as conservative a court as everyone thought it was going to be. But then again, we had Ruth Bader Ginsburg pass away 2 months ago, almost to the day. We knew she had been having health problems, but now she passed away 2 months before the election, or a month and a half before the election. She was a liberal stalwart, and now we had the threat of Trump replacing her. The Democrats tried to stop Mitch McConnell from doing this because they used his language from 2016, saying you can't confirm someone so close to the election. But McConnell didn't care, the Republicans didn't care, Trump didn't care. So they fast-tracked the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, pictured here, who was the Republican dream nominee. A woman to replace a woman, a conservative Catholic who's anti-abortion, anti-LGBT rights, pro-gun, pro-religious freedom. And her nomination took 1 month. From nomination to confirmation, 1 month, and she's now on the court hearing cases. So where does that leave the court now? Again, this is the current Supreme Court. We've got a 6-3 conservative Republican majority. The three liberals on the bottom of the slide here, Justice Sotomayor is the most liberal. Justice Breyer and Kagan tend to be a little more moderate. And on the top slide, the top of the slide, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito are staunch conservatives. They will never waver. Chief Justice Roberts, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh are very conservative, but they do waver a bit. We are yet to know what happens with Amy Coney Barrett. But importantly, since there are 6 conservatives on the court, it means that if one of Roberts or Kavanaugh switches to the liberal position on an important case, that can happen. You can still have 5 conservatives who agree with the conservative position. So it's a little bit of a buffer. So how is this going to matter going forward? We're only a couple weeks into the Amy Coney Barrett court, but it's pretty clear that what we're going to see is a big conservative shift on some important issues. And I'm going to talk about 5: abortion, religion, guns, LGBT rights, and voting. So first with abortion. The Supreme Court has protected abortion rights since 1973 in Roe v. Wade. There's been a series of cases since Roe v. Wade: Planned Parenthood versus Casey, a case out of Pennsylvania; Whole Woman's Health versus Texas, a case from 2016 out of Texas; June Medical versus Russo, which was out of Louisiana just this summer, where the Supreme Court has said abortion is a constitutionally protected right, but it allows states to regulate abortion in some ways, as long as the burden on the abortion right is not so heavy that it outweighs, as long as the benefit from the state regulation is strong enough that it outweighs the burden that is imposed on women's ability to access abortion. In the most recent case this summer, the case out of Louisiana, Chief Justice Roberts joined the 4 liberals to say that a restriction in Louisiana was unconstitutional. And he did not say the same exact, he did not have the same exact reasoning as the 4 liberals. He would allow more restrictions than they would, but nonetheless, he voted to strike down what was going on in Louisiana. But now, with Amy Coney Barrett on the court, his vote doesn't matter. Conservatives were very unhappy with Chief Justice Roberts that he voted to strike down the Louisiana law. He was considered a traitor. But now it doesn't matter if he is a traitor to the conservative cause, because if he joins the 3 liberals that remain, that's only 4 votes. And in the Supreme Court, 4 loses, 5 wins. So Amy Coney Barrett, providing that 5th vote, could drastically change abortion law in this country. Now, she has a history of signing on to and being publicly outspoken publicly about her opposition to Roe v. Wade. She has said those were her personal private positions. That doesn't necessarily mean she will rule that way as a judge. But when she was, before she was a Supreme Court justice, she was a judge on the 7th Circuit, which is an appeals court that covers the middle of the country. And as an appeals court federal judge, she never voted to strike down an abortion restriction. In other words, states were allowed to restrict abortion, according to her, in all sorts of different ways. So there is almost no doubt that with Barrett on the Supreme Court, there will be an allowance for more restrictions on abortion. The big question is whether she and the others would vote to overturn Roe entirely. Overturning Roe entirely would mean that some states get to make abortion illegal, whereas other states would keep it legal. So New York would keep it legal, California, New Jersey, Illinois, you can name the states where it would remain legal, but other states could make it illegal, and that would be okay with the Supreme Court. I think we are much closer to that world than we were 2 months ago, because I don't think there were 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe 5 months ago, but now there might be. Okay, so what about religion? And I very intentionally have a slide with the Christian cross on this slide and not other religions, because in the past decade, Christian religious groups have won exemptions to general laws repeatedly in the Supreme Court. In other words, they have claimed that because of our conservative Christian beliefs, we do not want to follow laws that other people have to follow. One of the most famous cases in this regard is Hobby Lobby, a case that from several years ago, where a Christian business owner from Hobby Lobby, the art store that's out in the West, a Christian owner of Hobby Lobby said, I don't want to cover contraception for my employees, even though it's required by Obamacare. And the Supreme Court said, that's okay, you don't have to, because it goes against your religious beliefs and you don't have to follow this law that every other business owner has to follow because it would infringe on your religious beliefs. You may also remember the cake case from Colorado from a couple years ago where a cake shop owner didn't want to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. And the Supreme Court said that that was allowed, even though Colorado law required business owners not to discriminate against gay people. There are a bunch of cases like that in the past few years that have carved out exceptions for conservative Christian religions, although in the guise of all religion, but they're always Christian religions. It would be interesting to see a Muslim or a Jewish person try and bring a case like this, whether the Supreme Court would feel the same way. But we're going to see even more of these cases going forward, where the Supreme Court looks at a claim of a religious exemption and agrees with the religious people saying that they do not have to follow generally applicable laws that everyone else has to follow. There's a case that was argued last week in the Supreme Court out of Philadelphia, where I'm coming to you from, where Catholic charity, Catholic Social Services, which runs a foster care service for the city, said they don't want to place foster kids with married gay couples. And Philadelphia law requires all contractors with the city of Philadelphia not to discriminate. And so they're arguing in the Supreme Court that they should be exempt from the Philadelphia law. And I think there's no doubt they're going to win because Amy Coney Barrett, joining the others, is going to vote in favor of these religious exemptions. Next up, guns. The Supreme Court in 2008 and 2010 said that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to own weapons for handguns for self-defense. This was a monumental ruling, but it was also very limited. It was limited to handguns and it was limited for self-defense. But this was an interpretation of the Second Amendment that says the Second Amendment protects individuals' right to own guns. Since that ruling in 2010, the Supreme Court hasn't taken up a single gun case, even though there's still a lot of gun restrictions all over the country. For instance, what about can a state prohibit 18 to 21-year-olds from owning guns? Can a state prohibit ex-felons from owning a gun? Can a state prohibit immigrants from owning guns? Can they prohibit you from owning certain types of guns? All these questions have happened, but the Supreme Court has said nothing, probably because the Supreme Court didn't have enough conservatives on the court who wanted to address this issue, because they get to decide when they want to take a case. And many conservatives, non-Supreme Court justice conservatives, politicians, are very unhappy that the Supreme Court has not spoken up more to protect gun rights. I think with Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, we are going to see more gun cases before the Supreme Court and more rulings in favor of gun ownership, striking down restrictions on guns in various states and cities around the country. Next up, LGBT rights. Now, this is one where the numbers might be working in favor of continuing to protect LGBT rights. So there's a series of cases in which Justice Kennedy wrote protecting gay rights over the 2 decades before he left the bench. The most famous, probably the same-sex marriage case, Obergefell, which said that every state has to allow same-sex couples to marry. This past year, the Supreme Court addressed an important issue for gay and lesbian people and transgender people, the question of whether employers can fire them because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that that is prohibited by federal law. Now, if you note the numbers, 6 means that 2 conservatives joined the liberals. So Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Gorsuch joined the liberals to rule that gay people are protected from employment discrimination. But now, without RBG and with Amy Coney Barrett, who has expressed antipathy towards gay people throughout her career, it's likely we will have one less vote to protect gay rights. And Chief Justice Roberts is a strange creature on this because he vehemently dissented from the marriage case. And yet he voted to protect gay people from employment discrimination. So he's got some mixed feelings about protecting gay people under the law. So we are on a razor's edge with protection for LGBT rights in the Supreme Court, and Amy Coney Barrett added to the court makes it even more precarious. And then finally, voting. The Supreme Court, even without Amy Coney Barrett, has been very hostile to voting rights claims and to claims of political gerrymandering and to claims about under the Voting Rights Act, things that the league holds dear. The Supreme Court has said that gerrymandering claims just there's no case against gerrymandering in federal court. It has allowed the Voting Rights Act to lapse so that there isn't protection against racial discrimination in voting in certain key places in the South. And it has allowed things like voter ID laws to go into effect. With Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court's going to be even more hospitable to these claims. To the extent Chief Justice Roberts has expressed some equivocation, especially in the past couple months, in some of the election law cases, Amy Coney Barrett will make his vote irrelevant because she has equally expressed these concerns, equally been hostile to voting rights claims in her career. But to be clear about this last thing that I'm talking about voting, I don't think there's any risk of the Supreme Court overturning the election. That's just Trump fantasy. And I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A if you want. Okay, just a few minutes left, but these are just 5 issues I've talked about. We are going to see a conservative move to the right on workers' rights, the death penalty, civil rights, criminal justice reform, the powers of Congress. All of these are going to lurch to the right with Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. So what can be done about this? Well, as you know, Harris and Biden won the election, but not enough support down ballot to really make too much of a difference with the Supreme Court. The Democrats lost 8 seats in the House, but they still control the House. They did not pick up enough seats yet in the Senate. Currently, there are 48 Democrats or people who vote with the Democrats in the Senate and 50 Republicans. There are 2 seats remaining in Georgia yet to be decided because Georgia's strange election laws said that because there was no one who got more than 50% in both of their Senate races in November, there's a runoff on January 5th. All eyes are going to be on Georgia because if the Democrats win those 2 seats, it will be 50-50 in the Senate. And then Harris is the tiebreaker by her position as vice president. She's the tiebreaker, so it will be a Democratic controlled Senate. So January 5th is going to decide the future of the Senate. It's a difficult hill to climb. Special runoff elections in Georgia typically see very low turnout for Democrats, but the stakes are very high. The stakes are so high for Democrats and Republicans. I don't know what's going to happen, but all eyes are on Georgia on January 5th and the run up to January 5th. If the Democrats control the Senate after January 5th, there are some things they can do about the Supreme Court. With enough votes, with all of the Democratic senators sticking together, they could try and reform the court, add justices, put term limits on the justices. That's a tough hill to climb as well, especially because there are some conservative Democrats in the Senate who have said they are not interested in doing those things, but maybe that could happen. They could also pass laws that protect abortion rights, LGBTQ rights through the Senate. They could pass laws spending money where they try and attach conditions to the spending of federal dollars. And they can also confirm nominees to head federal agencies that can work on some of these issues. Much easier to do if the Democrats win the Senate. If the Democrats do not win the Senate, these things are a lot harder. What we're left with is that President Biden could write executive orders, but executive orders are limited. They really only apply to the executive branch. So instead of passing a law that protects gay people from, say, discrimination in housing, he could have an executive order that says in federally funded housing, there can't be discrimination based on sexual orientation. All he can do with an executive order is control the executive branch. He can't control private employers. He can't control state employers. He can only control the executive branch. His nominees to head agencies will also have more difficulty because Mitch McConnell, who would control the Senate if the Democrats don't control it, Mitch McConnell would say, I'm not going to allow for any hearings on any Biden nominee to head the various agencies. So you have to put in temporary agency heads and they have less power and less authority. So it's a much more difficult road ahead for the Democrats to do anything about the Supreme Court and the issues that I've highlighted without the Senate, which is why January 5th is what's on everyone's minds. The issues that I've talked about with the Supreme Court, for now, the only chance that the Democrats have of trying to reform some of these things, only real chance, is by winning on January 5th, which is why everyone's going to be looking at that. I'm going to stop here. That's what I've prepared. I'm happy to answer questions. I see some are in the chat box, so I'll go through them and answer those. And feel free to add others. So first question, is there any way to modify any of these decisions, legislation, packing the Supreme Court? So some of these things can be changed by legislation. For instance, if the Supreme Court rules that a federal law does or doesn't mean something, then Congress can change that law. So if the Supreme Court ruled that the federal law that protects against discrimination in housing does not protect gay people from discrimination, Congress could pass a law that says that actually very explicitly this statute protects gay people from discrimination. But they need to have a majority in both houses because I don't think Mitch McConnell would allow such of a law to get before the Senate. Could we pack the court? So court packing is a very controversial idea that has an interesting history. The Supreme Court has had 9 justices since the 1860s. So it's been 150 years. Before that, the Supreme Court didn't always have 9 justices. Sometimes it had 8, sometimes it had 5, it had 7, it had 10. The number of Supreme Court justices is not set by the Constitution. It's just we have a tradition at this point of 9. In 1937, FDR proposed packing the Supreme Court with justices because they were doing everything, the justices on the court at the time were doing everything in their power to thwart the New Deal and make it hard for the government to pull the United States out of the Depression. And so FDR said, if you don't approve, or said he said, the only thing left for me to do is pack the court, add 6 justices so that those 6 justices will vote along with my programs and allow me to do what I want. Hearing the threat from FDR, the Supreme Court switched. It went from 5-4 striking down FDR's programs to 5-4 upholding FDR's programs. So they switched their votes to keep it at 9. Now wasn't explicit, but that's what happened. It's a very controversial idea. FDR was ridiculed for his proposal about packing the court. So when people talk now about the idea of adding justices to the court, because if you add, say, 4 liberal justices, the math now works out that you have 7 liberals and 6 conservatives, 7 beats 6. But it's a very controversial idea because of its connection to what happened with FDR and because we've had 9 for 150 years. But you can change the number of justices on the Supreme Court with a simple law. You don't have to amend the Constitution. So if the Democrats control the Senate, the House, and the presidency, that's going to be a possibility. What are the grounds for impeaching a justice of the Supreme Court? So justices of the Supreme Court hold office except for on good behavior is what the Constitution says. It doesn't use the same language as impeachment of the president, which is high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. That's the president. For a Supreme Court justice, it's good behavior. But that is very unclear. And we've had a couple impeachments of Supreme Court justices a long time ago. It would face the same hurdles that we saw with President Trump's impeachment and prosecution earlier this calendar year. If you can believe it, that happened this year. It seems like decades ago. But it would face the same hurdles. You would need enough Republicans to join with Democrats, and I just don't see that happening. It's very difficult to do. Is there any danger of SCOTUS overruling state election laws? So state election laws can violate the Constitution, but right now I don't see that happening. None of the cases that Trump has brought in all the various courts that Trump has brought cases raise any serious issues of constitutional law or election law. Everyone who looks at this agrees, everyone except for Trump and Rudy Giuliani agrees that the cases that have been brought about the election on November 3rd are really trivial at best and completely made up nonsense at worst. We're not talking like we were in 2000, where George Bush had the best conservative lawyers in the country trying to get him a win in Florida because he had a good claim they believed. There are no well-respected lawyers or even coming close to touching these cases. Trump had asked them and they were ready, but he doesn't have any cases that they are willing to touch. So the chances of those happening are, I think, zero. Did the Supreme Court find against the Voting Rights Act, or did Congress fail to renew it? Both. Congress has failed to update the Voting Rights Act in a way that would indicate which jurisdictions need protection under the Voting Rights Act. But also the Supreme Court struck down part of the Voting Rights Act, saying there is no longer reason to believe that these local jurisdictions are discriminating based on race. And so they don't need to be under the watch of the Department of Justice. This is actually where Ruth Bader Ginsburg became famous, because she wasn't the notorious RBG until recently. And it was in this voting rights case from, I think 2013, that she wrote a dissent. And she said that removing the Voting Rights Act, I'm paraphrasing here, removing the Voting Rights Act because jurisdictions, there's no proof that they're discriminating anymore, would be the same thing as taking your umbrella down in the middle of a rainstorm just because you're not getting wet. And it was that line that a bunch of law students at NYU thought was so amazing and so powerful that they made some videos online about how wonderful RBG was, and then it spiraled from there and she became the notorious RBG. But that was the Voting Rights Act that did it, the case where the Supreme Court struck down the Voting Rights Act. Can an executive order impact Planned Parenthood, which is a nonprofit? So an executive order can, no, an executive order can't, but an agency can. So a federal agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, controls the federal money that goes to family planning clinics. And so a new head of that agency could issue a new order that says that Planned Parenthood can now continue to get federal dollars for family planning. And I fully expect that a Biden administration will reverse the changes that the Trump administration put in place around family planning funding not going to Planned Parenthood. But that will be through the agency, not through an executive order. An executive order is just Biden himself putting out an order. An agency has to go through certain procedures to issue a rule, but I fully expect that to be one of the rules that happens. Where can people find resources on voting rights, even if the SCOTUS strikes down more voting rights protections? I think there's a bunch of places. The League of Women Voters website has a lot of great stuff about these issues. The Brennan Center in New York is a really incredible resource about voting rights. There's an election law professor named Rick Hassan who writes frequently on Slate and Atlantic, and he has his own blog called the Election Law Blog. He writes about it, and I think that those are important places. Can a constitutional court be formed to select the cases to be brought before the Supreme Court? That's an interesting question. I'd have to give that some more thought. The US Constitution very specifically says that there has to be one Supreme Court. But it leaves to Congress the power to create all the other courts. So the fact that there's a federal trial court and federal appeals court, that was all Congress's idea. That was not in the Constitution. So could Congress create a constitutional court that has some say before the Supreme Court. I guess so in theory. I think it would be hard for Congress to create a court that then says these are the cases the Supreme Court takes, because I think the Supreme Court would have to decide that themselves. Even if Democrats control the Senate, what kind of legislation would and would not require 60 votes to prevail? So 60 votes is the threshold for the filibuster. So the filibuster is a practice in the Senate where in order to end debate on a bill, you have to get 60 votes. And 60, because right now it's hard to imagine either party having 60 in the Senate. That means there has to be cross-party agreement, bipartisan agreement, in order to get to an end of a bill. Which is why, even though the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, they had a hard time getting through a lot of their policy concerns because the Democrats would just filibuster and they couldn't get to 60. So there are certain budgetary rules that do not have to, budgetary laws that do not have to be, cannot be filibustered. And so that's why you've seen some changes to the law. So for instance, Trump tax cuts that have to do with the budget. So they are allowed to get through the Senate without passing the 60 vote threshold, but it's very limited. And that's why it's very difficult to legislate in the Senate. The Democrats have suggested maybe we should get rid of the filibuster. But again, there's enough conservative Democrats, and all it takes to get rid of the, interestingly, all it takes to get rid of the filibuster is a majority vote. You don't have to have 60 to get rid of the filibuster. So the Democrats could change their rules, the Senate rules, with a mere majority. So they could vote with a majority plus Harris to get rid of the filibuster. The problem is Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat from West Virginia, Kristen Sinema, from a Democrat from Arizona. They are very moderate, if not conservative Democrats, and they have already expressed their unwillingness to change the Senate rules. Now, maybe they could be persuaded otherwise, but even if the Democrats win the Senate, that's a real difficult haul. Will the court feel uncomfortable being seen as so partisan? I think these are the things that commentators like to say. I don't think the justices care. I think that commentators like to say, well, the Supreme Court has lost legitimacy because of this, that, or the other thing. But the Supreme Court just goes on, keeps on keeping on. They do their thing. They rule the way they want. The individual justices, maybe Chief Justice Roberts might care a little bit, but they just keep on keeping on. And I don't think they care one bit about what the rest of the country thinks about the process around it. I know there are certainly other law professors and commentators who disagree with that, but you know, I think back to 2000 when, after the Supreme Court decided that election in Bush v. Gore, all sorts of political commentators said, oh, that's going to ruin the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court came out of that just fine. People still respect the Supreme Court. Its rulings are still followed by lawyers and government officials and lower courts. They are doing just fine, even despite that threat to their legitimacy. Same with Justice Kavanaugh. When Justice Kavanaugh was appointed, there are a lot of people who were furious at what happened with the way that the Senate treated Christine Blasey Ford. But Justice Kavanaugh is a justice. He's going to be a justice for 40 years, barring health problems. And his time on the Supreme Court, his power on the Supreme Court is not diminished in any way because some people think that his process was illegitimate. And partisan. We're getting up on the time limit for these questions, so I'll just take a couple more. Why hasn't the Supreme Court ruled definitively on the global gag order or on funding for abortions? The gag order is an executive order usually signed on day one by Republican presidents that prohibits foreign aid dollars to go to any organization in other countries that counsels about abortion, performs abortions. Trump signed it on day one. Biden's going to get rid of it on day one. I don't know why there haven't, but the reason the Supreme Court hasn't decided this is because no one sued about it. The Supreme Court can't just decide issues that it wants. It has to have a lawsuit, and there hasn't been any lawsuit about it. I don't know why, maybe because there's just so much discretion on federal foreign aid dollars, but it's a good question. Might a justice become more liberal like Justice Brennan? And I think I'll take this as the last question, and then unless I'm told otherwise by Joanna and Leslie. But yes, justices can change. There is no doubt about it. There's a long history of justices on the Supreme Court becoming more liberal. There's a much smaller history of justices on the Supreme Court becoming more conservative. So for instance, Justice William Brennan and Chief Justice Earl Warren were appointed by Republicans, and they were Republicans. And Warren presided over the most liberal Supreme Court ever. And Justice Brennan was probably one of, if not the most liberal Supreme Court justice ever. There's just a small number of justices who are appointed by Democrats to be liberal who became conservative. Justice Felix Frankfurter is one. So yes, it's possible that these justices on the court could change. But I think what we see now is that there's a much more detailed vetting process of justices before they become of nominees before they become justices, where both sides, liberals, Democrats, and conservative Republicans, don't want to make the mistake that they see has happened in the past, where they appoint someone to the Supreme Court and they turn out to be not what they expect. So they look very hard at the nominees past, and they are loath to nominate someone that they do not know for sure how they are going to rule. So they might change. They've got a long time on the bench, and people change with time. But I think the ones who are we currently have here on the picture here, I don't see them changing. I could be wrong, but I don't see them changing right now.
David,
there are a lot more questions, and I appreciate that, but the time is up here, and so I'll turn it back to Joanna and Leslie.
Thank you, David. I have to say I'm very depressed. I'm going to have a
I'm not an uplifting speaker these days.
But I appreciate what you told us. It does sound like we have a rough road ahead. I'm now going to open this up for people who just want to talk. Anybody who thinks this is enough, please sign off. We hope you come and join us at some of our future meetings. And David, if you have a couple of minutes, if you could stay on and see if anybody has additional questions.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for all the information you've given us.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Everybody, if you want to say something, you can just unmute yourselves. So feel free, unmute yourselves and have at it.
Okay, Gladys.
Professor Cohen, how did the Bork hearings change the Supreme Court hearings for the rest of time?
So that's a really good question. I think part of it is, so when Bork was nominated, he was an outspoken conservative. He did not hide anything. He's probably the most known nominee at the time. And so part of, his position on issues was his originalism, his idea that the Constitution only means what it was understood to mean by the people who wrote it. And he took some really wild positions. In particular, the one thing that I think really stood out was he was opposed to the Supreme Court decision around birth control. So in 1965, the Supreme Court said you can't prohibit birth control. And 99+% of people use birth control. So to have a nominee in 1987, I think it was, 86, say that they are not going to support the decision that says you can't that birth control is allowed, that's really an out there position. And so he was voted down, and the Republicans have been furious ever since. They see it as that he was treated unfairly, that the Democrats did not give due respect to the president and to Bork's stature as a legal thinker, and they have used this as justification for doing whatever they can to get people on the Supreme Court that are as extreme as possible on the issues they care about. And some of them use the history about Bork as justification for putting Amy Coney Barrett through, even though they said the opposite 4 years ago. They said, you know, it doesn't matter what we said about Merrick Garland in 2016. You didn't allow Bork to get on the Supreme Court, so we don't care what you say, and we're going to put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. So the memory of what happened with Bork is strong. The Republicans have never forgotten it. And I think it's part of their sort of being single-mindedly focused on the Supreme Court and making sure that the judges that they nominate are not going to be liberal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. I wrote it in there, but what you say, like Planned Parenthood will probably, what did you say? They're going to do some kind of act to, I don't know how you said it. Anyway, what other agencies will probably become more active now that the Supreme Court is so conservative?
So when I was talking about Planned Parenthood, I was talking about the DHS, Department of Human Services. I think you're going to, I mean, look, I think you're going to see Biden try, especially if the Democrats don't win the Senate, to use the administrative agencies to try and implement as much Democratic policy as possible. So I think you're going to see him try and put, you know, liberals on as agency heads for the EPA and the Housing Department and the EEOC, which deals with employment discrimination, and the Labor Department. You're going to see these agencies try to push the Democratic agenda through agency rules. And that's controversial because agency rules are not the legislative process, right? You know, if you think back to Schoolhouse Rock, you don't learn about how agencies implement rules. You learn about Congress passing laws, get signed by the president. That's how we think laws are made. But so many of the rules that we live under are rules from agencies. And they're controversial because agencies are not elected. The officials are not elected. So, you know, if Congress passes a law we don't like, we vote them out. If an agency head passes, you know, pushes a rule that we don't like, we have no recourse because we can't elect them. They're not voted for. So it's controversial when this happens, but when a president's agenda is stymied in Congress, they use agencies to try and get that agenda through. Republicans, Democrats alike, both sides do this. And I think you're going to see Biden try to do this with all of the federal agencies.
Okay.
We actually have a couple of questions in the chat, one which I'd like to address from Carol Melman. So Carol asks, what can we do, if anything, as the League to protect our issue positions in the Georgia races? What we can do as the League, so we cannot get involved in the Georgia races in terms of supporting or opposing any candidate, right? That is strictly against our nonpartisan policy. How can we protect our issues positions? We can continue to advocate with our legislators and our elected officials for the positions that, you know, that we hold. But in terms of the Georgia races specifically, first of all, we are the League of Women Voters of the City of New York, and we are, you know, our focus is New York City. That this would be a Georgia League question ultimately, but at the end of the day, again, they themselves, we are strictly nonpartisan, and we can neither endorse nor oppose candidates.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
What about get out the vote?
Just one moment. I know that David has to get off soon, so he has a birthday party to get to.
Which just means going upstairs to the kitchen.
Well,
because it's COVID. It's
I mean,
COVID, you know?
if you tell us anytime you want to leave, but
A
because
few more
I
minutes,
know
a few more
people will
minutes is
question
fine.
you. Pardon?
A
Okay,
few more
okay.
minutes is fine.
Okay, who is talking?
So Carol was asking, what about get out the vote? Obviously, get out the vote is absolutely in our wheelhouse. We can definitely always work to get out the vote. Now, again, this is Georgia, and we are the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. So as in a league in New York City, there really isn't anything we can do to get out the vote in Georgia. As individuals, of course, everybody is welcome to do as their conscience dictates, right? But, you know, we could if you're interested, you could also contact the league in Georgia,
Right.
the
that's
state
what
league
you
in
said.
Georgia, and ask them, right, what they're doing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so my question was, and I'm not even sure if this is possible, just because of ideology, but in state and local races, we saw referendums that basically people voted in favor of nonpartisan redistricting commissions. Is there a way, since Supreme Court justices are supposed to be nonpartisan but are tied to ideology, is there a way that we can fix the process to appoint Supreme Court justices who are in effect neutral? Because most of the Supreme Court justices we see now were taken from the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank.
Yeah, that's going to be hard. I mean, the Constitution is 100% clear about this, that the president gets to nominate Supreme Court justices. So to reform that would be to reform the Constitution. And that's, you know, there have only been 17 constitutional amendments since 1791. So it's hard to amend the Constitution. And given, I just don't see that happening. Now, there could be efforts, you know, bipartisan organizations, neutral organizations come together to put up a slate of more moderate centrist justices so that a president will choose from that slate. Obviously, you can't force a president to do that, but you can try and pressure the president to do that. I really see that as a hard road to go down, because this is one of the prizes of winning the presidential election. That is very clear. If you win the presidency, you get to appoint judges, and that is part of why both parties fight so hard. That's part of why people swallow a pill and vote for people they don't like, right? Like, why does Trump have so many evangelical supporters? Because of judges. You know, evangelicals do not believe that Trump cares one bit about them in terms of religion or their life, but they know that he's going to appoint judges that they like who might ultimately overturn Roe v. Wade. And so if you get rid of presidents appointing judges and justices, it would radically change our presidential politics, maybe for the better, but you would need a constitutional amendment to do that.
Okay, is that it?
There's
David?
one question about whether contraception legality could be in jeopardy.
Yes, so I think that's an interesting question. I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see the justices going back on that 1965 ruling, but I do see the justices carving out a lot of exemptions to mandates that employers and health insurance cover contraception. And so that's where we're going. So basically, originally with Obamacare, one of the novel things about Obamacare was that it required health insurance plans to cover preventive medicine. And then the agency defined preventive medicine to include contraception and used all the common forms of contraception and more. And so health insurance plans had to, as of 2010, cover contraception. And this was a huge breakthrough, expanded access, and it has to be covered free of charge. So this was a huge, huge change for people's reproductive freedom, autonomy, and justice. But we had the Hobby Lobby case that said that a religious, privately held corporation doesn't have to cover. And then President Trump's agency issued a regulation, back to agencies issuing regulations, issued a regulation that said that any business that has a religious or moral opposition to contraception, so not just a religious opposition, and it doesn't have to be a religious business. So the Hobby Lobby said that we are, you know, we're a family-owned business. The family is the business and the family's religious. So they said we're one and the same. It doesn't have to be a religious business. It doesn't have to be a church. It just has to be any business with a religious opposition or a moral opposition doesn't have to cover birth control. And the Supreme Court gave its blessing to that law several months ago. So I don't think we're going to see any state banning contraception and the Supreme Court saying that's allowed. But I do see more and more exemptions to covering contraception in healthcare plans. Yeah, Gladys?
If you were a betting person, how would you bet on the outcome of the Affordable Care Act decision that the court is looking at today?
So last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments for the third time on the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. The first time was about its constitutionality. The second time was about a statutory provision. This one was about the tax bill, the Trump's tax bill, zeroed out the individual mandate penalty. So if you don't have health insurance, the penalty is zero. It used to be about $800 on your taxes. Now it's zero. So Texas sued and said that without that individual mandate, the law is unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court heard the case last week. I think the Supreme Court is not going to strike down the Affordable Care Act, and here's why. They may say the individual mandate is unconstitutional, but at least two of the conservative justices at oral argument, Kavanaugh and Roberts, said, I don't see why, if this one part is unconstitutional, we have to throw out everything else. And there's so much else in the Affordable Care Act.
I know.
So I don't think, you can never take 100% guarantee that what they say in oral argument is what they're going to do. But it did seem like the two of them are not interested in striking down the whole law, even if this one part is a problem. And then just quickly, because I see someone asked this question twice, what about the lower court judges over the past 4 years? This is an area where, Trump has been wildly unsuccessful in so many different areas of his presidency, but he has been wildly successful with appointing judges.
Right.
It has been a single-minded focus of him and McConnell together to pack every open seat in the federal judiciary with young conservatives. And this is something that we are going to be living with for a long time, because they are going to be on the court a long time, and they are going to, the Supreme Court only takes about 70 cases a year. All the other cases are decided by the lower courts, and they are going to be decided by an increasingly conservative lower court judiciary. And that is a very serious long-term effect of the Trump administration.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to stop this now. This has been fascinating. I'm not only going to have a martini, I'm going to have an aspirin. But we really appreciate all you've said and all this information you've given us, and we totally appreciate it. And perhaps we'll hear from you again.
Yeah, maybe something more uplifting.
Okay, thank you all.
There is nothing.
Not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.